Hi everyone, you can call me Sunflower. I put in a decent amount of effort to try to read more in 2025, and as a result, I read a lot of books that I really enjoyed. To clarify before I get started, the books I'm about to talk about are in no particular order, and not all of them were published in 2025. I just happened to read them this year. And with all that out of the way, let's get started. Becoming Ninja Sex Party, the graphic novel, Part 2. I love NSP and all of the related spin-off bands that Dan Avidan is a part of. I find his story in particular really inspiring as someone who's trying to make a go of content a little bit later in life, relatively speaking. I read Part 1 last year, and that mainly focused on who they were and where they were before they started the band, and ended when they first met. Part 2 focuses more on the ups and downs and trials and tribulations of NSP. There's also some insight into their personal life, with Danny trying to get multiple bands off the ground and joining Game Grumps, and with Brian and how he met his wife. I've said it before in a previous video, but this isn't a hard-hitting tell-all memoir. It's very much a rosy, softened trip down memory lane. I'm sure there's a lot of things that they left out and they have no interest in telling the public because they're both relatively private people, and I completely respect that. I think the stories that we do get in the graphic novel are more than enough to give us insight, and it's a fun read. Although, I understand I may be biased because I've been a fan of the Game Grumps and NSP and Dan Avidan since Danny joined Game Grumps. It is nice to see where they started and how far they've come, even in a memory lane sort of way. Speaking of books that were created by YouTubers, I also read Volume 1 of Aurora. Originally a webcomic created by Red of Overly Sarcastic Productions, this is, as you might have guessed, the first printed volume. There's a handful of webcomics I follow, but a lot of times I prefer to have the printed physical edition in my hand. Something about it is just easier for me to read, although I know that's a personal preference more than anything. As far as I know, Aurora is Red's first published story, and it is a little rough around the edges as far as world building and storytelling goes. It does take a couple of chapters for her to find her rhythm, but when she does, the story gets so exciting, and there's a lot of fun action and comedy sequences in between all the fun character beats. And speaking of characters, that is 100% Red's true strength. You get yourself a core cast of characters, including the main character Kendall, the healer Alinua, the arrogant but technically correct in how good he is Aaron. And as the story goes on, they add more to their traveling party. My favorite character happens to be Faust. He's an emotionally stunted catboy with a tragic backstory, and while he does want connection and friendship, he still struggles with the particulars of it. And it's very fun to watch his personality bounce off of everyone else's. The story itself is still ongoing, so I'm still following the webcomic, and while I won't get into any spoilers, I'm really excited to see where the current arc goes from here. In keeping with comics and graphic novels, I also read a lot of manga this year, including She Loves to Cook and She Loves to Eat, a sweet, slice-of-life, wholesome WLW romance. The title pretty much explains the premise. Nomoto loves cooking, but she's not a big eater. Kasuga is not great in the kitchen, but she has a big appetite. It's a really sweet story, and it's also not afraid to talk about the difficult relationships women in particular are expected to have with food, both in creating it and consuming it. It's sweet, it's light, it's wholesome, while still being realistic about adult relationships in a very sweet way. And in a similar vein, I also read all of I Think Our Son Is Gay. It's a more episodic type of story in which we follow a mother, Tomoko, as she watches over her family and especially her eldest son, who she suspects is gay. She has no interest in pushing him to come out or anything. She's just very quietly watching from the sidelines, letting her son know that she supports him no matter what. We also do get some chapters from the son's point of view. Hiroki has a crush on his classmate, and while he's not very subtle about it at home, he's managing to hide it well enough at school while he's still figuring himself out. But really, I Think Our Son Is Gay is not about romance. It's about the family and the Aoyama household as they navigate all these different situations while Tomoko is still trying her best to be there for both of her sons. And now onto fiction. It took me basically the entire year, but I did get through the entire Heroes of Olympus series. I didn't grow up with Percy Jackson like a lot of people did, so I've been having a lot of fun catching up and getting to know all these characters that I know so many people love. The Heroes of Olympus series in particular is so fun because you can really feel the upping of the stakes. There's a lot more on the line, and also a lot of these characters are older now, so they're grappling with things like their relationships with their parents and their relationships with each other. I loved all of the books in the series, but I do have a special place in my heart for House of Hades. No spoilers, but if you know, you know. I already have Trials of Apollo on my TBR cart, so that's probably going to be my main Percy Jackson read for the coming year. In a slightly different type of fiction, I also read This Is How You Lose the Time War. I'm fully aware I'm late to the party on this book, but I actually read it fairly recently when I was doing my Sonic 06 loading screen reading challenge a while back. It is a quick read, clocking in at just under 200 pages, but it really left a mark on me. At the heart of it all is a very sweet and tender love story, but there's also a conversation about what it means to love in times of chaos and destruction. This Is How You Lose the Time War is hard to summarize without losing the essence of what it is. You really do have to read and experience it for yourself, and while I may be the last person to tell you this, I am still going to tell you that you should read this one. As for nonfiction, I read a few, but the only one that really left an impact on me and that I highly recommend is And Then, What Else? By Daniel Handler. And if that name isn't ringing a bell, you probably know him better as Lemony Snicket, author of A Series of Unfortunate Events. And Then, What Else? Is his memoir. And the best way I can describe the vibe is if Lemony Snicket decided you were finally ready to move from the kids' table to the adult table and started telling you his life story. There's something fun about reading a memoir that's written by a writer. There's great wordplay and double entendres. He talks about his multiple relationships with both men and women, and the memoir covers everything from his early childhood to where he is now as a successful author. And while I won't go into too many details because I highly recommend that you check this book out yourself, there is some continued ragging on a certain godforsaken Nickelodeon, but all jokes aside, And Then, What Else? Is equal parts comedic and tragic, much like most of life. And it's wonderfully and expertly written by someone who cares about the craft of writing. It's actually my only 5-star read of the year. It can be heavy at times, but it's not too dark. And if you ever read A Series of Unfortunate Events and grew up loving it in some way, I highly recommend you check this one out. And those are the books that I read and really loved this year. Going forward, I am going to try to make a more concerted effort to read more, to read broadly, and that's part of the reason I started booktubing. I love reading, but as an adult with boring adult responsibilities, it can be really hard to prioritize if I don't put in that effort. I always have to remind myself, and hopefully it'll help you to hear it too, any amount of reading is better than no reading. All right, let me get off of this soapbox now. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.